Hi there and welcome to Hyundai Power Products. My name is Adrian and today we're going to look at this HY27550 oil-free super silent compressor from Hyundai, and I'm going to show you a few useful maintenance tricks and tips when using this machine. Now this style of machine is pretty much not a disposable item. A lot of the old style compressors, piston compressors, once they were worn out and it was ready for the bin, as it were. But with the proper care and maintenance, these machines can go on and on. So the first thing we're going to do is make sure we're unplugged from the mains. The machine is off anyway. Okay, so next thing I want to do is make sure that the air is completely drained. So I'm just going to fit a gun in the end of here, and I'm going to drain all of the air from the system just to make it safe to work on. I'm going to go to the underside and just open the water drain. Okay, so we've drained every single bit of air out and it's equalised to atmospheric pressure. Now just leave that drain tap open on the bottom, so if there's any water in the bottom of the tank, it can let its way out. And that's tip number one. We always need to drain the water out of the tank. Is issues with machines that haven't been drained on a regular basis, and the tanks over time, due to condensation and temperature differences, will fill up with atmospheric moisture. So I have seen machines come back to us that are deemed faulty and the tanks have been full to the brim with water, and that's the reason why the machine will be cutting in and out all the time, because there's no volume left in the tank because it's full of water. So drain that drain in the bottom regularly. Just open it up every morning before you use it perhaps, or at the end of every evening when you finish with the machine. Open it up, let the air drain. Once the air and the water drain, once all the water is out, shut the drain cock, and that's good practice for your compressor. So, tip number two. Quite often, if they've been filled with water, grime, dirt from the air, all sorts of problems, we can get an issue with the non-return valve on the machine. Now, it's basically a little silicone pad with a spring behind it. If any dirt, grime, grit gets in there, flakes of rust from inside the tank where it's had water in it, it can clog up that non-return valve and stop it operating. Symptoms of that would be, when you turn the machine off, nothing connected to it, you can hear a leaking of air. It'll be leaking from the non-return valve, which is actually down here, and back through the heads of the pumps when the pumps aren't running. So if you can hear a hiss or a leak of any description on the machine, that normally points to the non-return valve. And again, if that non-return valve is leaking, even if you can't hear the hiss, you will notice that the machine is cutting in and out a lot more often. As air is passing back out, it's leaking it faster than you're using it, or at the same time, so you'll notice that the pumps are cutting in and out more often. And of course that will shorten the life of the pumps too. Important to keep this valve clean, and we'll show you how to do that. Okay, so let's take apart this non-return valve. So in the center here, between the two motors, you'll see this brass valve union point here. Inside here is the non-return valve. You'll see this hexagon plug on the end. So I'm going to take a 19mm socket, an extension bar. I'm guessing if you've got a workshop that has a compressor, there's a good chance you're going to have the appropriate tools for this. So a little bit of an extension bar on my socket, 19mm. Set the ratchet to the right direction, and okay, I've just loosened that off. So let's get it a good part of the way out. Okay, it should be finger tight now. I'll just pass my hand under there and unscrew that by hand the rest of the way. So just going to take that plug out completely, and you can see round the outside there's a little silicone seal, so we need to be careful with that. I'm just going to leave the spring and plunger. Oh, it did jump out. Okay, so what you're going to see is a little rubber plug with a spring. It goes rubber side in first, so I'll just put that to one side, and again around the outside of the little cap here, you'll see it's got this little O-ring seal on it. So I'll just push that back down into position. Okay, so that little O-ring is back down in position now, ready for refitting. So what we need to do is to make sure that we clean this thoroughly. A little bit of WD-40, bit of spray, bit of brake cleaner, something like that. Just clean out any debris or dirt that's around this cap, first thing. Secondly, we can do the same thing, give this a good clean. Now the problem normally occurs with grit and dirt, bits of rust and bits of debris around this space. This is the sealing face that stops air returning, hence why we call it a non-return valve. So we need to make sure that this is completely clean on this surface. Okay, now if your spring has rusted through, or this has deteriorated or is damaged in any way, these are readily available from our parts department. But this is the only sort of wear or service item you'll get in the non-return valve. So while we're on the subject of cleaning, we also need to clean up all the insides here where we took this valve out. Now there's a little seat down inside, which again can get bits of grit and dirt on it. Very difficult for us to get you a shot of that. I think we probably can. Let's see if we can show you. So as you can see, down inside the fitting, there's a little semicircular seat down in there, and that's what the rubber pad pushes against to make a good non-return seal. So we need to make sure that that area is all clean as well. So we're all thoroughly clean. I'll just pop it back in, rubber side in first, just get it roughly into position. And I'll just get it started by hand, making sure not to cross thread it. And go so far in, finger tight first of all, just making sure that that O-ring is now completely buried within its seat inside there. That looks good. And then I'll just take my ratchet and just nip that back into position. So that's the non-return valve serviced. Part of the major function of a compressor is to suck air in and blow it into the tank. So what we don't want is any restriction on the inlet. So if I just rotate that slightly anti-clockwise, you can see that obviously we don't want dirt in the pumps, so we do have these air filters. Now it is important to keep these clean at all times. If you're in a particularly dusty environment, where you're using grinders, that sort of thing, it's surprising how quickly these can get clogged up. Now obviously these parts or filters are available from our parts department, and they can be changed out for new ones. But on the same note, they can be blown off with the compressor itself, just to get rid of the worst of the debris, just to prolong their life. But as I say, new ones are available. So it is important to keep these clean. If these become blocked, it not only affects the efficiency of the machine, but it can also cause overheating within the pistons, the motor, everything else, because it's under greater strain. And that will shorten the life of your machine. Okay, so we've done the non-return valve service. We've checked the air filters. Everything's good. That's pretty much it for routine servicing. Obviously, we need to drain the tank on a daily basis. After long periods of use, it's possible that we may need to pay attention to the valves within the pumps here. So the valve plates, the cylinder bores, and the piston seals. So this is going to get a little bit more technically involved, but as I said at the very beginning of this video, this isn't a throwaway item. If we change these when they're needed, then it should go on and on and on. Okay, so we're going to strip down the tops of this pump. So we're going to focus on this one, but it's a complete repeat procedure when you're doing the other one as well. So the first thing I'm going to do is to remove the air outlet pipe. 17mm spanner, just loosen that union, undo the nut, and that's that pipe removed. I'll just tuck that out of the way here, and that frees up the head. I will just take the air filter off, just so that it don't damage it. There we are, we'll put that to one side as well. So I have a 4mm Allen key now, and you'll see each one of these individual heads on this engine or this pump has 6 Allen bolts. So I'm just going to loosen off all 12. Okay. So I'm not going to bore you with me taking Allen bolts out of 12 holes, but you get the general idea, I'm sure. Okay, so that's the final bolt of the 12. Now, these are 2 individual heads, and these are the air passages between the 2. They have little O-rings either end, but we can take off this assembly as one. So I'll try and leave the valve plates behind, which are the black plastic units, and remove the heads as one. So as you can see, it's quite a simple assembly. There's an air port through there and through there, out the other side. So I'm going to put that to one side. If there's any debris or anything in here, obviously give it a good clean. And we have these little tiny gaskets. Very important that we don't damage those gaskets because they form part of the seal. So I'm going to put this head unit to one side and we'll look at the valve assemblies. Okay, so this is a valve plate. It has an inlet and an outlet. So you'll see this block here, there's a valve under here, and you'll see this hole here. Again, we have this little O-ring. The valve is down in there, the one on the other side, and this is the valve here. It's what we call a reed valve. So it's important just to check these valves, make sure they're not cracked or broken, and again, these are replaceable. If there's a crack through them, it would explain why you've lost efficiency, and make sure that there's no dirt or anything underneath this valve. To remove the valve, we can simply undo this screw. So I will undo this screw and show you how to remove and replace a valve. In fact, this one's the simple one. If I do the one on the other side, which is more difficult, that'll probably be the better one to show as an example. Okay, so I'm just holding the plate in place. And down in this hole, a little Phillips screw. I've got a little dumpy screwdriver here. I'll just undo that screw completely out of the way. As I lift up the black plastic part and making sure I don't drop the screw, there's the little reed valve. Okay, so as you can see, it's a little piece of sprung steel and it's bent downwards. Can you see the curve in it? So when I refit it or replace this valve, if it needed replacing, we need to fit it with the curve downwards. So if I fit it on there in place, as you can see, when I clamp down on it, it pressurizes it against the head. If I were to put it on upside down, clamp down on that, as you can see, there's a gap under it. So important that the curve is facing towards the hole. Okay, drop my screwdriver. So I'll just carefully realign this, place the screw back in the hole, just line it up. Okay. So these little valves, as I say, are important, and over many, many hours of use, you may see cracks or distortion in the little valves. So that's the most difficult one to change. That's back in place. And as you can see, this one's fairly simple, but again, it will have that slight curve. Make sure that it's curved downwards. Following that, we have this O-ring here. If there's any damage or problems with this O-ring, all these bits and pieces are available from our parts department, including this complete plate. Okay, so we would inspect this side of the pump in exactly the same way. Just as a point of note, when you take these off, it's important that they go on in the correct direction. And as you can see, if you take them off one at a time, they both go on in the same direction. So this side, this side. So what I'm going to do is push this piston down until this piston comes up. And then I can remove the actual cylinder liner. That's the cylinder wall. And as you can see, there is a little bit of sort of flaky powder in there, and I'm just going to remove that just to keep it clean and ensure a good seal. Okay, so there's no wear on these items. These are good. They can be reused. But again, this is a part, if you see wear in these cracks, you know, if there's any sorts of issues whatsoever, these can be replaced quite cheaply as well. So the next thing we're going to do is to remove this piston ring. So you can see this sort of orangey coloured seal on the outside of here. That's the seal between the liner and the piston. So again, 4mm Allen key, just going to carefully loosen that off. Okay, so being very careful here not to drop the screw down inside the motor. That would open a whole can of worms. So I've got the screw safe and out of the way. Okay, so if I lift that off, you will see, I'll just flip it 180 degrees. You'll see this little logo here was pointing in this direction. I'm taking a mental note of that. I know it needs to go back that way. And you'll see on the underside that there are these two lugs and corresponding holes in the top of the piston. So when we put it back on, we know it goes with the logo facing that way, as I'm looking at it now, and the two lugs are in the hole when we put the screw back in. That said, if I just take this off, here's the little piston seal. So again, We just make sure this is clean and undamaged. Now heat can affect these over time and they can become hard and brittle. So again, these are easily replaced, and so are the liners. So reassembly, this one's perfectly good. I'll just pop it back on, make sure we've got the orientation right. Make sure I've got that down in there. Line up the two lugs, there we are, back in place. Now, a little bit of low grab Loctite or thread lock on these would be a good idea, but not the fully sort of fledged stuff, just the low bite stuff. So like an anti-vibration thread lock on these would be a good idea, just to stop them coming loose. Again, don't over tighten these. I'll just wind it down into place. Again, I was being very careful not to drop the screw. Okay, that's nice and firmly tightened down. So that's ready for reassembly. And again, to reassemble the liner onto it, it's important that we come in, don't try and push it down on top because the cup forms upwards. So we need to tease it into position. You can see I've gone all the way around there. And now, when I square it up, it's in position. I'll show you that again because it's a little bit of a knack. So just to show you that again, I'm going to put the cylinder right on, low on one side, on an angle like this, as you can see. If I slide it right over the back edge, it goes on really loosely. And then when I square it up, whoops, I went too far. When I square it up, that's place the cylinder liner over that seal without damaging it. Don't just try and push it down on. That's the way to do it. And once I've done that, you'll see that the cylinder liner will fit down into its recess in the bottom, ready for reassembly. So what I would do at this point is push this piston down, and you'll see this other side jumped up, and this one's ready for work. So having gone through the valves, the seals on the pistons and the liners, we know everything's good. We took a mental note of all the orientation when we put it together. So here we are, put the valve plates back on. We've looked at all the valves, we know they're good. And then back on with the head itself. So of course, again, I took a mental note. I know that the outlet pipe is on your side. So I can simply place the heads back on in position. There we are. I lined it up approximately. If I just stick 4 corners in position first. And that'll line everything up, get those bolts started. Now again, good practice for this would be to get all of these bolts started in their holes, threading in by hand before we start getting tools on them. That's just the way I do things. That way you know you're not going to damage any threads or force anything. So as we did earlier on, I'm not going to bore you with the details of me doing up 12 bolts. So we'll cut here and come back when we're back. So I've been around 11 bolts. Last one, tighten them into position. Okay, so with that done, let's refit the outlet hose, make sure we've got no debris or dirt. Again, just get this started by hand. It should start by hand. You may have to line it up slightly. There we go. And we have a 17mm spanner. I'll just nip that down and that's tight. Again, back on with my air filter. Typically, if you were servicing these, it would be the time to fit new air filters as well. But we've gone through that earlier. So I think we've covered most of the wear items on this machine now as far as servicing, repair and maintenance. Well, I do hope you found this demonstration useful. For more information on this or any of our other products, visit www.hyundaipowerproducts.co.uk. I've been Adrian and thank you for watching.